March 15, 1945. After about 10 days of combat, the last major offensive launched by the German army on the Eastern Front has ended. Despite the great effort made, in which the Germans have attacked with the last elite divisions they still had, the result for the Germans has been disastrous. Without being able to meet any of the objectives set in Operation Spring Awakening, the German divisions are now in a very vulnerable position. Remember that during the Battle of Kursk, the Soviets had let the Germans attack first, and then counterattack when their enemy was worn out. The situation in which the German units found themselves after the attack was as follows. The 1st and 2nd SS Panzer Corps, together with the 3rd Panzer Corps, were located east of Lake Balaton and Lake Valenze, in the narrow corridor they had just opened. In the rear, to the left of Lake Valenze, was the 4th SS Panzer Corps, whose mission was to prevent its comrades from being encircled by the Soviets. After allowing the Germans to attack first, Stalin modified the initial plans and ordered several simultaneous attacks. One towards Komarum, following the southern bank of the Danube, and another towards Lake Balaton, seeking to encircle the German troops in the region, thus clearing the way to Vienna. For the new operation, the Soviets mobilized overwhelming forces, with 750,000 troops from the 3rd Ukrainian Front and 272,000 from the 2nd Ukrainian Front, backed by more than 1,600 tanks and tank destroyers. In contrast, Army Group South had 270,000 troops and 772 operational armored vehicles, many of which were immobilized due to lack of fuel following the destruction of the German refineries at Komarno on the 14th of March. Although on paper the German force appeared considerable, losses and logistical limitations eroded its ability to respond. In the main sector of the Soviet attack was the 4th SS Panzer Corps, consisting of the Totenkopf and Viking divisions, with 40,000 men and fewer than 100 armored vehicles. These troops had spent weeks constructing elaborate defenses, including deep trenches, thousands of landmines, barbed wire, and reinforced artillery positions. However, the lack of materials such as concrete and Soviet superiority compromised the effectiveness of these defenses. Despite the efforts of German commanders such as Otto Gila, the carefully planned Soviet offensive, backed by overwhelming firepower, loomed as an insurmountable threat. Hitler's repeated mistakes in insisting on maintaining the Lake Balaton offensive when its failure was already evident allowed the Red Army to meticulously prepare its attacks. The precisely executed Soviet operations aimed not only to defeat German forces on the battlefield, but also to secure the advance towards Vienna, marking one of the last decisive blows on the Eastern Front before the total collapse of the Third Reich. The Soviet offensive, which would become known as the Vienna Operation, began on the 16th of March 1945 with a devastating one-hour artillery bombardment described by German officials as the most intense of the war. Following the bombardment, 3 Soviet armies launched an attack on a 50-kilometer front. Although the Waffen SS Viking and Totenkopf divisions held their lines, Hungarian forces on the left flank fell back some 5 kilometers, weakening the overall position. Otto Gil, commander of the 4th SS Panzer Corps, sent his reserves to hold this left flank, but this left the SS divisions vulnerable for the next few days. The lack of reinforcements, such as the 6th Panzer Division, aggravated the situation as it had been sent to support other sectors days before. By the end of the first day, the Germans already lacked reserves in this critical sector. Despite the seriousness, Hitler prioritized continuing the attacks towards the Danube, confident that the 4th SS Panzer Corps could hold off the Soviets. This decision was supported by Wöhler, although key figures such as Guderian and Dietrich recognized the danger and ordered preemptive moves to reinforce the defense in the western sector of Lake Valenci. On March 17th, heavy rains and warm temperatures turned the terrain into a quagmire, hampering the movements of German troops and armor, who also faced a serious shortage of fuel. Although the 1st SS Panzer Corps was ordered to move north to meet the Soviet advance, the slow transfer of positions from bridgeheads south of the Sayo Canal delayed the move. Otto Wöhler, initially focused on an attack on the Danube, eventually recognized the severity of the Soviet offensive and requested that the 1st SS Panzer Corps and 2nd SS Panzer Corps move into the attacked sector. Balch, aware of the danger of an unhindered Soviet advance to the northwest, ordered the weakened 356th Infantry Division, which had barely 4 functional battalions, to be sent to reinforce the defenses in the Vertes Mountains. The situation was critical, as in addition to the 4th and 9th Guards armies, the 46th Army and the 6th Guards Tank Army were expected to enter the fray, further aggravating the situation for the Germans. On the 18th of March, the Soviet advance of the 3rd Ukrainian Front continued in force, attacking towards Tatabánya, between the Verte and Gerx Mountains, and south towards Székesfehérvár. After overcoming the first Hungarian defensive lines, each new defensive position proved weaker, facilitating an ever faster advance westwards. The Viking Division held out stoically at Székesfehérvár, but began to show signs of wear and tear. Meanwhile, the Totenkopf Division gave ground near Mór, and Soviet forces approached Várpalota, threatening to cut off the logistic routes to Lake Balaton. Simultaneously, the Leibstandarte Division completed its withdrawal from the CO Canal and Siementornia, reaching Deg in the afternoon, still 40 kilometers from the main front. The Hitlerjugend Division moved forward with orders to defend Várpalota and block the Soviet advance towards Balaton. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, under Wilhelm Bittrich, began its withdrawal to the west, while the 44th Infantry Division, handed over to the 3rd Panzer Corps, faced a devastating Soviet attack southeast of Lake Valenche, resulting in its total annihilation. Meanwhile, the 6th Panzer Division was sent west of the Verta Mountains to contain any Soviet advance towards the railway lines at Komarno and Komarum. Joseph Dietrich was given command of the front between Lake Valenche and the Gers Mountains, reinforced by the 4th SS Panzer Corps, while Balch and the 3rd Panzer Corps defended the space between the lakes. During the 4th day of the Soviet offensive, the Red Army was able to break the resistance of the Viking Division west of Lake Valenche, pushing it back to Székesfehérvár, where intense urban fighting began. Simultaneously, a gap opened between the Totenkopf and Viking divisions, threatening to collapse the front of the 4th SS Panzer Corps within days. Reinforcement arrived just in time. Elements of the Hitlerjugend's 26th SS Panzer Regiment were deployed at Balinka to protect the Totenkopf's left flank, while the Leibstandarte vanguard closed the gap near shore. However, the Leibstandarte was severely weakened, operating at only 30% of its authorized strength. The situation of the Hungarian Third Army was disastrous. Its front had completely collapsed due to the inability of its units to resist the Soviet offensive, aggravated by the lack of German reserves nearby. Although the 6th Panzer Division and Das Reich were assigned to reinforce the area, they were too far away and would need several days to arrive. On the other hand, the Hohenstaufen Division, caught in fighting near Osi while trying to retreat, was stationed there to prevent the Soviets from reaching Lake Balaton and cutting off the 3rd Panzer Corps. After several days of intense fighting, by 20 and the 21st of March, Tolbukin's 3rd Ukrainian Front achieved major breakthroughs in the German and Hungarian lines, destroying 2 Hungarian divisions. However, Soviet forces were also suffering from attrition from fierce German resistance, especially from the 4th SS Panzer Corps. Despite exhaustion on both sides, Tolbukin maintained the initiative and launched the 6th Guards Tank Army against the German lines near Lake Balaton on the 20th of March. The German Totenkopf and Viking divisions, already reduced to half strength, faced serious gaps in their front. The Leibstandarte and Hitlerjugend counterattacked desperately, but although they managed to temporarily halt the Soviet advance and destroy numerous enemy armored vehicles, they eventually gave ground. Little by little, the Soviets advanced to Tess and Várpalota, coming dangerously close to Lake Balaton and driving Viking out of Székesfehérvár. On the other hand, the Soviet 46th Army overcame the Vertes Mountains and advanced towards Komarum, isolating the German forces to the east. Meanwhile, Soviet air attacks paralyzed German movements, and an acute shortage of fuel further complicated the defense. In response, Hitler ordered a fanciful pincer offensive between Lake Balaton and the Vertes Mountains. However, given the circumstances, the plan was never executed and proved to be a waste of time. Between 22 and the 23rd of March, the German front completely collapsed in the face of the advancing Soviets. The exhausted 1st SS Panzer Corps was unable to withstand the 6th Guards Tank Army, and the German defenses at Osi, Varpalota, and Tess crumbled. Simultaneously, the Soviet 26th and 27th Armies forced the 3rd Panzer Corps to abandon its positions and retreat under threat of being cut off. For its part, the 4th Guards Army broke through the lines of the Viking Division, isolating part of its forces south of Székesfehérvár and advancing to cut off the German retreat to the west. Despite these setbacks, some elements of the Viking and 1st and 3rd Panzer Divisions managed to link up with the defensive line established by the Hohenstaufen Division at Osi, although the 44th Infantry Division was annihilated in the retreat. General Balck, who had shown unfounded optimism about the ability of his forces to resist, was overwhelmed by the scale of the Soviet attack, supported by 2 mechanized corps. In the midst of the crisis, Balck admitted that he had never faced such a critical situation, describing March 22nd as the worst day of his career. German survival owed more to heroic individual actions than to effective strategic decisions. By the end of the 23rd of March, the German situation on the Hungarian front was critical. An attempted counterattack by the weakened Viking Division against the 6th Guards Tank Army could not be carried out, and the Germans lacked replacements, weapons, and equipment to recover. The town of Veszprém, which contained the last rail link connecting the front to the northern shore of Lake Balaton, was in grave danger of falling, which would have isolated the German forces east of that position. The divisions trapped in the Gersch and Pilis Mountains were in an even worse situation, with no possibility of rescue by Das Reich or the 6th Panzer Division. Under pressure from the advancing Soviets, Hitler finally authorized the evacuation of these isolated units and allowed the withdrawal of the 3rd Panzer Corps. The 24th of March marked a decisive collapse in the German front line north of Lake Balaton. The advance of the 6th Guards Tank Army towards Marcoux near Veszprém cut off communications for the German divisions of the 6th SS Panzer Army. Although General Otto Wöhler attempted to order a general retreat to save his troops, Hitler forbade this, insisting on defending the sector to protect small oil wells southwest of Lake Balaton. This forced the German troops, reduced to fragments of divisions, to adopt unsustainable defenses. The Soviet offensive broke through the German positions between Lakes Balaton and Valenche, forcing constant retreats towards Vienna. Unable to contain the Red Army, Wöhler was relieved of command on the 25th of March, although he remained temporarily at the front. During these days, German troops destroyed their own tanks for lack of fuel, including 14 Tiger II's of the 509th Heavy Panzer Battalion. The Waffen SS, pushed back 50 kilometers from their original positions, retreated towards Devexer, Papa, and Tet. Meanwhile, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps defended the left flank between Komárom and Győr, but German defeat in Hungary was already inevitable. On the 26th of March, a new Soviet attack managed to break through the defensive line that Dietrich's men had established on the axis of the cities of Devexer, Papa, and Tet, and forced them to retreat to the Markal Canal, located about 10 kilometers to the west. The next day, this attack was joined by other offensives north of the Danube by the 2nd Ukrainian Front, which quickly managed to penetrate the defensive lines of the German 8th Army, and by the following day, reached the city of Komarno. Hitler from Berlin received information on the evolution of events in this sector at least 24 hours late. Furthermore, on the map shown to him in his bunker, his various elite divisions were marked with forces far superior to those they actually had. Due to the confusion and the poor situation on the Hungarian front, during the briefing on the afternoon of March 26th in Hitler's bunker, the German leader was informed that most of Joseph Dietrich's divisions were much further west than he had believed. This information, which made him understand that he was being deceived, and that the men he was proud of had disobeyed his orders to resist at all costs made him furious. Otto Günsche, belonging to the Leibstandarte division, was one of his main aides who was present at the meeting, and years later he commented the following about the meeting. Hitler expressed his bitterness against the command with harsh words, especially that of the Waffen SS formations and even that of his own Leibstandarte. It was a terrible situation when the Führer revoked the right of the Leibstandarte to bear his name on the cuffs. Everyone present fell silent. Hermann Göring, who was not very well regarded at the time, said something to the effect that the Waffen SS, especially the Leibstandarte, had fought bravely on all fronts since the beginning of the war and had already lost its authorized strength several times. He considered this measure unjust and a betrayal of the men and officers, and especially of Joseph Dietrich. On the other hand, Himmler did not say a word in defense of the divisions of the 6th SS Panzer Army. The next day, Hitler ordered the cuffs bearing his name to be removed. This deeply symbolic gesture demoralized the soldiers, especially the veterans, who felt betrayed by the leader they had faithfully served. Meanwhile, the Soviets intensified their offensives, isolating and fragmenting the German troops. By March 28th, the forces of the Second Ukrainian Front managed to advance north of the Danube, while attacks by the 4th and 9th Guards armies and the 6th Guards Tank Army forced the Germans to retreat toward the Austrian border. The German units, already severely weakened, had to abandon many of their defensive positions due to lack of fuel and resources, leaving behind many armored vehicles and weapons. The German retreat continued until April 1st, when the troops crossed the Austrian border. Dietrich hoped to establish a solid defense near Vienna, but the Soviets advanced rapidly and besieged the city a few days later. Although the German authorities attempted to organize a last-ditch defense, mobilizing the Volkssturm and Hitler Youth, these measures were insufficient. Soviet numerical and material superiority, with a force ratio of 10-1, ensured the fall of Vienna on the 14th of April. The operation culminated in disaster for the German forces. Army Group South's casualties included some 30,000 dead and an unknown number wounded and missing. In addition, the Soviets captured approximately 130,000 German and Hungarian soldiers. Material losses for the Germans were catastrophic, with over 1,300 armored vehicles destroyed or abandoned. Compared to the losses suffered during the German offensive in early March, these were significantly higher for both the Germans and the Soviets, reflecting the brutality of the fighting. Nevertheless, by mid-April, Army Group South was completely disjointed, marking the final collapse of German resistance in Hungary and Austria. In short, Operation Spring Awakening, the last major German offensive of World War II, turned out to be a strategic disaster. According to Alfred Jodl, the Wehrmacht's chief of operations, Germany had no capacity to inflict significant defeats on the Red Army, although he justified the attack in Hungary as a maneuver to defend vital oil sources and divert Soviet troops from the front near Berlin. However, the attack was poorly planned and executed. The Germans faced adverse terrain, heavily defended Soviet positions, and weakened logistics. The Waffen SS divisions, confident after previous successes, were quickly worn down, and the offensive devolved into a battle of attrition that ended up favoring the Red Army. Although the Soviets suffered significant casualties, their offensive capability was not affected. The operation failed to achieve any of its objectives, as it failed to weaken the Third Ukrainian Front, protect the Hungarian oil fields, or delay the Soviet advance on Vienna, which fell on a date similar to that planned by the Soviets. It also left the German army severely weakened, with irrecoverable losses in its elite divisions.